attended another breakout?
I tried to.
Which
The
one?
leadership one that was this morning at 8:30.
Okay.
The teacher wasn't here, so
Oh, Pickens didn't show up, did he?
Pickens did not show up. So
Ah.
I went and walked on the elliptical for a little bit.
That's always fun, man.
Yeah. My husband's a delegate. I'm just here as kind of a
Cool.
support.
Cool. Well, we'll get it done. This is going to be an easygoing, fun, entertaining, educational presentation about Latinos in the country, in Texas, on liberty, on political issues, policy items, preferences, trends, patterns that I've seen, the things that I've worked in and around. I'm an entrepreneur, an activist, someone who's well ingrained inside the Latino community, someone who understands it well. I'm Latino, I was born in it, inside the culture. I always show this video whenever I present because it's pretty much like the perfect sort of segue into talking about the Latino community. I mean, these folks, you know, perhaps they're underrepresented, perhaps they're considered a political, or not political, but a demographic minority, but they're very happy, very proud people. Representation, I think, is important. You know, you get these people like Mark Anthony, they're considered to be champions of the community. Mark Anthony's Puerto Rican, he's from New York. You see these people are in, of course it's a video, it's sort of staged, but it's a very well representation. The song has a lot to do with cultural pride as well. These people are waving their flags, which really has to do with where they're from, you know. Proud of being Colombian, or proud of being Ecuadorian, Puerto Rican, Cuban, things of that nature. So,
What's your heritage?
my family are Texans. They're Tejanos. They were born. My dad was born in San Antonio. My mom was born in Harlingen, in the Valley. My dad's dad was from Mexico. My dad's mom was from Texas, and we have deep roots here in this part of the country. I live in San Antonio now. I consider myself, I'm going to talk a little bit about identity. I consider myself to be Chicano. So that's pretty much it, you know. Yeah. What about you?
A little bit north of here, Texas for sure. I was born in Dallas and lived in Irving and Holland County, so significant Hispanic population, you know, from everywhere, from Puerto Rico, definitely Mexico. I had a lot of my friends growing up were Colombian and Ecuadorian, so it's part of, I guess the immigration portion has become kind of my personal culture. And I have a lot of respect for people that care about their history and their roots, and you know that is, for me, that's my exposure to America has been, you know, it's not just, well, we're Americans and this is our state. My culture is intercultural.
Yeah, that's great you see it that way. I don't think a lot of people do. I think perhaps there are some people that do, but they just don't want to voice it or talk about it as much. But you know, it's absolutely right. You know, I mean, I like to think in terms of a global perspective as well, because when you think of the Americas, you don't just think of the United States of America. You think of North America, Latin America, Central America, South America. You know, it's a couple of different continents. It's a unique sort of mashup of different people. And I can just kind of start talking and getting into it, because I think we're kind of good on time and people will come in and go as they please. But, you know, if you look at the history of the Americas, you know, there were indigenous people here, you know, in North America and, you know, Latin America, or at least with the parts that make up those North and Latin America now, South America as well. There were indigenous people and different tribes. And then the Spanish came, the European came and kind of mixed and blended in with those individuals and made Latinos. You know, they were a sort of a mestizo, or a mixed race, so to speak, a mixed population. And that really makes up who Latinos are. You know, when we talk about who exactly are Latinos, they're a mixture of different folks. Now, you also have to talk about a population of Africans who traveled, I guess, to the Americas via the slave trade. And many of the Africans, they came through Brazil. The majority of Africans came through Brazil. you know, and there's more Africans that make up Latinos than they do African Americans. Yeah, and it's sort of a sensitive subject because of the whole history of slavery and the slave trade. You know, additionally, it's a very protected, sort of guarded community. Latinos and Africans, African Americans in this part of the world are very guarded. Sort of a once bitten, twice shy sort of history, right, with things that have happened. You can look at slavery, you can look at segregation, you can look at lynchings, things of this nature, and it's really kind of shaped and molded who we are. Today you're seeing, you know, this population of people sort of fighting back in whatever fashion they can, because it's just, people are tired of it, right? You know, that sort of stuff.
Well, I mean, even up into the 40s, obviously, with like World War II and the eugenics movement and all that, there was, I can see obviously where you have, you know, some reservations and because in the grand scheme of things, that's not very long off.
It's not that long ago.
And it was something that, you know, I've listened to, you know, all sorts of podcasts,
Yeah,
but one of them that just came on was, you know, they got into eugenics a little bit and talked about how it was like this celebrated thing at like different state fairs, and it's just so bizarre. And, you know, being down here and like I said, in the community that I grew up in, I don't know if you know much about the demographics in like Irving and Dallas and Tarrant County. It's like 50-60% Hispanic and like 20%, you know, African American, and so it's I got the whole race thing like is just. I mean, I understand that it's a separator, and I've got, you know, family members, you know, obviously being white that are you know, have racist tendencies that I, you know, disassociate from.
Yeah.
But thinking about like, you know, Middle America and how that's very, very.
Is this your breakout speaker?
Yeah,
Your breakout speaker?
How are you? Maximo, we're just getting started here, so don't worry, we're just kind of having a gentle
I wanted to say hello because I'm running for Texas Court of Criminal Appeals.
Cool.
And I, along with Mark Tippett, do speak a little bit of Espanol.
Good, I saw that on the sign for Tippett's there. He had a little slogan.
Well, for Tippett's, but I'm not
That's
been
okay.
really advertising
That's
it like
okay.
Tippett's, you know.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about the language as well.
I'm from Las Cruces,
New Mexico.
New Mexico, and I graduated from UTEP, UT El Paso.
Sure, right there, right across the border.
And then from there I came to Houston. So that's been my life. Needless to say, I've had over the years, since I was 4 years old, with the Hispanic, Mexican American, Latino,
Yeah.
Chicano, whatever you want to call it. The first one being, of course, that my mom hired a nanny because my father wasn't around. And that's where I started learning Spanish when I was 4.5. I'm sure you've heard that story before.
That's okay. That's okay.
You know, you know, he learned Spanish with me.
That's all right. However you can learn it.
Right?
However you can learn it.
Oh, I learned it. And not even learned in school. I learned with the kids. I learned it formally, informally, on the street. You know, I mean, on and on. You know, I don't. It's just not the one thing. You know, but I started young. That's at 4.5. What she would do is she had Sunday off, and she would bring in all the other nanas, housekeepers from all the neighborhood. And then they would get together, and then they would be chit-chatting, they would have a little luncheon, and so that's how I would pick it up. And they would be gossiping,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then sometimes she put the radio, you know, and I'm using her word, and I would listen to it, you know, and that kind of thing.
Sure. So I'm definitely going to be touching on a lot of these subjects that you're mentioning here. And I don't know how much time you have, but we can just continue the conversation. But, you know, absolutely. I mean, both, you're right on the money with a lot of this sort of stuff. And I think that this discussion is fruitful and germane to when we talk about Texas and Texas politics and the landscape, because the demographics are changing across the country and in Texas. New Mexico as well, California as well. Latinos are, the numbers and the demographics there in terms of our population has risen. We're at about 56 million right now inside the United States that we know of. I would suggest that that number's higher because of the way that the census takes the numbers.
Do you know what the third largest or second largest Spanish-speaking population in the world is after Mexico? There's Mexico is the first, And I think there's a three-way tie between the United States, Colombia, and
I would have to think maybe Spain. I
I
don't
don't
know.
know, because Spain has Catalan
That's true.
and has Gallego.
Yeah, a couple of
And even a little bit of Basque, but not very much. So even Spain doesn't have a very big Spanish-speaking population because they've split.
True.
Well, Mexico, of course, is definitely number one.
Yeah.
No question about that. But I don't know who is number 2 and 3. I don't know if it's the United States is number 2,
Yeah,
or Colombia or something. That's just that I was.
that's good. That would be good for you to look into.
Yeah,
I'll look into that for sure.
Yeah, because the numbers have been changing. I looked at some old numbers. United States was like number 3, and I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah.
It might be number 2.
Yeah. Well, in terms of identity, you know, you're talking about some of those different identifiers. She asked me earlier, I personally identify as Chicano because that term is a political term. It is a term that was created in the 60s along with the civil rights movement to honor the past, honor the indigenous side of our sort of blood and our roots that doesn't get really looked at
Is
much.
that considered an older word? Because when I was a kid, I don't know if you want. I should tell you my age. Speed limit, 55. Okay. And I grew up in the 70s, and that was the word we used.
Yeah,
And then it became kind of
a little taboo.
out of fashion
Yeah.
or taboo. What's your opinion on that? I mean,
So-
because you're maybe more
Yeah.
aware of that than
So
me.
I agree with you. That term didn't catch on in the way that it should have with a certain population of people. It turned some people off. It was a bit of a radical term in the 60s. You know,
In the 70s, I'm talking 70s.
70s.
I grew up in the 70s in Las Cruces.
Yeah, it was a term that kind of turned some people off. Over time, it's come back around. I live in San Antonio, which is a very Chicano city. It's more Tejano, I would say, more Tex-Mex. San Antonio is, but there is definitely a Chicano population there. It's a term that's coming back around.
Another one that you mentioned, Tex-Mex, in California they don't call it, they call it Spanglish.
Yeah,
And we call it Tex-Mex. So do you think Chicano maybe is a Texas, New Mexico word instead of a
No.
California word?
No, I use it in California as well.
Mm.
In fact, in San Diego, there's Chicano Park. I don't know if you've heard of Chicano Park. You might wanna look
I didn't
it
know
up.
about that part in San
There's
Diego.
actually an incident. I won't pull it up here.
Mm.
I didn't have it included, but a group of like radical white supremacists wrote online that they were going to take over Chicano Park. This happened about 6 months ago, and they actually showed up, and there was like a resistance movement of many angry Mexicans, Latinos, Chicanos that showed up there, and it would have turned violent had the police not ushered those guys out of there. But Chicano Park's a good one to check out. There's some amazing artwork and murals that are right down
I've not been there, so I don't know.
Oh, it's amazing. You gotta check it out. I've been there. It's
I've been to
awesome.
San Diego though, that's funny. Like, have you been to San Diego?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of good things to talk about. Right now you're seeing, and listen, the term Latino is one that many folks don't agree with. Some folks don't agree because they say, well, look, I'm not Latin. Right?
Well, it comes from Latin America,
Yes.
and that includes Brazil,
Yes.
Central America, South America.
Central America, South America, and Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So it would be
and
like the
Latin.
Islanders would wanna.
And then some people say that Latino does include Italian and French because those are Latin, and Portuguese, so those
Yeah.
are Latin-based
It's
languages.
a very mixed match, hodgepodge.
That's what it sounds like.
People are confused. People don't agree. And listen, I was in a talk a while ago, and somebody asked me, who's the Latino Jesse Jackson? Somebody wanted to know who is like the leader, like a civil rights leader inside the Latino community, and the answer is we don't have one because we're too diverse. We're too big of a population, and we can't agree. I have a joke that I tell. I said, look, we can't agree if we want flour tortillas or corn tortillas when we're at the dinner table because it's just.
I would say los dos.
Yeah, you can have them both,
Los
right?
dos, you know.
So there's also the term Hispanics, which people don't like because that is a term that was given by the government, U.S. Census, to kind of categorize people. They created that term based on Spanish, Hispaniola, and that conquering and colonization. And many folks don't agree with that as
Yeah, the
well.
island of Hispaniola, which is actually half French.
Correct.
It's
Haiti.
Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Yeah.
Right.
And it was the first island that was named by Columbus,
Yes.
El Colón,
Yeah.
and he said for España. And
Correct.
They named it Hispaniola.
Exactly. So many sort of radical Latino individuals, folks that are leftists, they don't agree with the colonization of Columbus and that conquering of
Yeah.
people and
Yeah.
taking over.
The Conquistador.
Yeah, they don't agree with that, and that's sort of a conflicted part of our history. I
Yeah.
mentioned the African as well.
Yeah.
part of that, which that is all in there as well. The other sad part about that is there's a big aspect of colorism inside of the Latino community and anti-blackness.
Well, then you have the, mulatto and the, what is it, there's another word. In Brazil, they use the word preto.
Yeah.
I mean, prieto is in Spanish.
Yeah.
And this is dark.
There's a lot of that sort of stuff, right? Sort of
kind of messed up.
exactly, it is messed up. And there's all sorts of these terms in Portuguese and Spanish, Spanglish as well. But really the Latino people today inside of the United States are a mix between European, indigenous, and African. Me, myself, with my traits, I'm probably a mix between an indigenous and a European person of the Americas, and many of us are mixed sort of mutts, so to speak, as we kind of joke around with. The term Latino today, and again, you have different waves of people that have come and gone and left their imprint, right, on this sort of identity, right? We talk about Chicanos and what that means. Nowadays, we have Chicanas, right? You've got the feminist movements and different women that are saying, look, we're not men. The term Chicano and Latino is a masculine term.
And that's another element that I would have.
That's the Spanish language allows for the feminization. I mean, English does not.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just about highlighting that and actually
Correct.
standing out and saying, you know what, I'm not gonna let, because some of the cultural mores of the, Chicano population is very masculine.
Very
And-
sexy.
and
Oh, I see.
There's,
Macho.
and I say that not speaking of necessarily from my own perspective, but from my, girlfriend's perspectives that are, and more ingrained in that culture, and they see that, and they feel like they need to have a voice and stand up for themselves, because sometimes there are elements of that population that do sort of shroud female representation and strength, and
They want that.
yeah.
And nowadays as well, many Latinas and women of color in the past were hindered from many things, for different opportunities, gender stereotypes and those sorts of roles. Today, they're just sort of breaking free from a lot of that sort of stuff. You're having, really right now inside the Latino community, you have women who make up the largest sector of entrepreneurs. You also have, we're seeing more Latina women run for office, those roles of just, you can only be a nurse or you can only be a teacher, those sorts of things aren't around anymore. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. The other thing with regards to that is that, in terms of gender identity, we're seeing that being struck and being less of a concept, more of a social construct. So you're having the term Latinxes. I don't know if you've seen that term come around. I have it highlighted right here, but I'll spell it out for you. Latinx.
What's that?
This is a controversial term. It's a gender neutral.
I'm getting behind the times here.
You're gonna want to look it up. You're gonna see perspectives for it and against it.
Okay.
You have people that perhaps from the trans or transgender community are saying, look, we'd rather not identify. We don't want to identify as male or female.
So
They create the X. You've also seen that in the past with the Chicano population, because Chicano can also be spelled like this.
Oh yeah, but that would be shit. That would be more of a
Yeah,
shit.
it's more of a shit. It's more of a shit.
Such
Because that X
or shut
was from the Aztec and Mayan language, the Nahuatl. The Nahuatl language was the indigenous language of the people of Mexico.
They say now what?
Nahuatl, Nahuatl. There's different ways, and there's many of different tribes,
Yeah,
and
I've heard that.
yeah, tribes from that area. So that's a quick look on the demographic. Okay, in terms of Latinos in Texas, there's about 11 million folks here. Okay, 19% of all American Latinos live in Texas. The two other biggest Latino states in the union are New Mexico and California.
Somehow that didn't surprise me.
Yeah. I mean, you would, because again, Mexico with the population it does, Mexico City being the largest city in the world.
Those states were part of Mexico.
Correct. That's the other important component to all of this. Again, we look at this deep history of the Southwest. Southwest United States used to be Mexico. We can talk about how that was taken, how there was wars, how it was stolen, and it's very controversial inside the Latino community. The Latino community, just like anything else, right? We could talk about the Libertarian Party, we could talk about the United States, can be divided, right? Can be fractured up, and there's many different pockets and subcultures, right? The Southwest is considered, the Latinos in the Southwest are considered very different to the Latinos in New York. in the Northeast.
Which makes sense, because you've got, this is probably much more Mexican,
It
Central
is.
American,
It
then you've
is.
got more Cuban and Spanish.
Absolutely.
Puerto Rican.
You
Puerto
go,
Rican.
you go to Florida and it's like Miami, it's Cuban,
Cuban,
it's Puerto Rican, it's all
And I'm
this
sure
other
they
stuff.
wouldn't associate necessarily with,
They would have very different views.
Absolutely.
They would have very different experiences that led them to what they believe.
yes.
And that's a part of what we're going to talk about. So when we're talking about some of these trends and patterns, as a whole right now inside the Latino community nationally, you're having a lot of organizations come around and trying to increase civic engagement, civic participation. There is a huge push to get people to vote right now. It's all about turning out the vote, getting people to vote, show up at the polls. That is huge right now. They're not necessarily telling people how to vote, but they're saying get out there and vote. There's organizations like Vote the Latino, which you might have heard is based out of Washington, D.C., based out of San Antonio, Texas, the Willie E. Velasquez Foundation, who coined the phrase, su voto es su voz, your vote is your voice. And they've got representation all throughout the Southwest. There's many organizations that are trying to increase people to get out there and vote, but as well to get out there and perhaps run for office one day, to be in there and to kind of, not only have your voice heard, but out there to run for office. The other kind of trend and pattern that we're seeing from the 2016 election is anti-Trump. Because Trump came out and said some very derogatory things against Mexicans, and that didn't sit too well inside the Latino community. And when we say the Latino community, pertinent to this discussion, we're talking really the majority of it being Mexicans, Mexican Americans, Chicanos, because that's this Southwest identity, this representation, right? You can clump in, El Salvadorians as well, other people from Central America, because they make up a large portion of people who would be in this country from these particular countries. You have a big population of folks that are anti-Trump. Now that's not all. I think I've seen the latest statistics, or one of the statistics I've seen was about 90% of Latinos disagree with Trump. Perhaps didn't vote for him. Maybe 10 to 12% did. Still agree with him. I've got friends and family who are Latino who like Donald Trump, and that's their business, right? Just like anything else. Moreover, when we talk about Cubans are a different demographic to Mexicans. You can look at some of the laws with immigration and refugees in the United States, but many Cubans are perhaps on the Republican side, more on the right, anti-Castro.
And you know that changed.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
It's now are being treated equally as
Yes, that was an Obama move.
at the very end of his administration.
Correct, and that did not sit well with many Cubans inside the United States. It's a
It was
very
payback. It was payback because Hillary lost Florida.
yeah.
That's what they say.
Could be some of that. So again, many Cubans in Cuba, have felt the wrath of the Fidel Castro regime, and being communism, right, and having this sort of authoritarian regime in Cuba. So many of them, with some of the wars and some of the battles that the United States government had with Cuba, developed something, I believe, in 1970. It was called the dry foot, dry land policy, meaning that if you were Cuban and you fled from Cuba and you made contact on land in the United States, that you could stay. Yeah, and many of them have been against communism in its fashions. So many Cubans here sort of identify on the Republican side. And that's not all, that's some. Ana Navarro is a popular political pundit. You might have seen her online, just destroying Donald Trump in all of her glory. But she identifies as a Republican, and people like her. The next sort of trend and pattern that we could talk about is immigration. I know you talked about it. And this is a very hot button item inside the United States right now with regards to Latinos, immigration. Now, immigration as a whole isn't a particularly a Latino issue. However, considering it is a border country, many Latinos have immigrated here. And in fact, the numbers are down with regards to what it's been in the past. In fact, more Mexicans are leaving the United States to go back to Mexico. But nonetheless, immigration is still a popular item. One of them.
Can I ask you where you're from? Are you from here in Texas?
I'm originally from Lansing, Michigan. My family's from Texas.
And you live in Texas right now?
I live in San Antonio, correct?
Okay.
My dad's from San Antonio. My mom's from the Valley. She's from Harlingen.
So you're background, you would be Mexican American.
Correct. Yeah, I claim and identify as Chicano. That's my sort of thing. I like that because again, there's it's kind of a blend. It's a blended identifier, and there's many. Identity is, again, I kind of laid out some of those identifiers at the beginning because that's a very sort of sensitive as well as cherished.
It's personal.
It is personal, right? To tell, people get offended when you say, well, you can't identify as this, right? I don't know how you all may identify. You may say I'm Texan, you may say I'm Irish American, you may say I'm Latino, however you may identify, right? That's your business, right? That's your...
Now, my parents were born outside the United States, so I identify myself as a Serbian American because my parents were born in Serbia. And I also identify myself as a Texan because I lived here for 30-some years.
Yeah.
And I identify myself as a Houston because I'm Houstonian because I live in Houston. So, so I mean, but I think that sometimes people get offended when you ask them about their identity in the wrong way, or I don't know, or some people are just sensitive about it.
Yeah. Tone, energy, right? The Latino people are very spiritual people. They go off vibes, they go off energy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the keys, there's the various keys to, I know you're running for office, one of the various keys.
I might need that
Sure.
here for you.
One of the keys to winning over the Latino population is your energy, right? Your intentions. I think that's very important, and I think people can feel that sort of stuff out much better than they can tell you, right? I think that's very important. What sort of energy do you introduce when you walk into a room? So I think that's important. Immigration. Immigration is a sensitive thing right now. You've got a population of young people who were brought to this country by their parents, and then they're here. I think it was Barack Obama who introduced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, and you have many young people who are fighting for their right to stay here. So that's another sort of hot button item. Furthermore, you got to look at Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a U.S. colony, a U.S.-owned territory, and they've had some issues with the hurricane that blasted through there a couple of months ago. Many people in Puerto Rico are still without power sources, and that's a hot button item right now. So many Puerto Ricans are immigrating or just moving to the United States, and they can do that because they have United States citizenship very easily. They can just come right on over and move
No
forward.
permission needed.
Yeah, right.
No government permission. Government.
There you go.
Permission.
There you go. Right. There you go.
Be correct.
The permission's already granted.
Yeah, it's implicit. It's built in.
It's built-in government permission.
Yeah, and Puerto Rico's a very beautiful place.
Yes, it's gorgeous. It breaks my heart. I'm like, we were just there in 2012. It's like.
Yeah, where'd you go, by the way?
We stayed in Aburia, and we were all over. We were in Rincon. We went to a lot of different beaches because one of our friends, he's native Puerto Rican, and he's a surfer, so he took us to Las Palmas and just all these beautiful locations. And anyway, we stayed in, I think it's the west side of the island, and then we would just go back and forth to San Juan if we wanted to.
Puerto Rico's a good place to visit. It's small, it's relatively safe, you can travel in and out of there easily. A lot of people speak English if you don't speak Spanish. So there's a good opportunity to get over to Puerto Rico every now and then.
Absolutely.
Many folks are trying to help the country or the island. They're conflicted about whether they're a country or an island as well. We talk about identity. One of the ways people are looking to contribute there is for folks to get out there and vacation, to give some money back to the island. Yeah. So next what you have right now is a high sense of grassroots activism, which is leading folks to run for office. Again, we talked about a sentiment of people inside the Latino community having an anti-Trump sentiment. So many folks are fighting back however they can through their grassroots activism. You see this quite frequently, and I'm going to pull up a couple of organizations and examples and some of the work that they may do to kind of fight back against things that they may consider to be racist, things that they may consider to be sexist, homophobic, things of that nature. So I think that. Yeah. So with regards to top issues, policy issues, again, we talk about immigration, but from a recent poll, and many of this information is taken from the Pew Research Center with regards to Hispanics or Latinos, the top 3 issues for them are education, jobs in the economy, and healthcare. These are, again, policy issues that are ranked extremely important to individuals.
So legalization of marijuana is not on it. Not one of those.
So that's another sensitive subject with regards to the Latino community. again, when we talk about, you know, the identity of Latinos, the majority of them are very humble, very, you know, hardworking, very respectful to authority, things of that nature. And that perhaps has something to do with perhaps immigration, right? When we think about the population of people that are inside this country, it's, okay, you're here, you've been granted the right to stay here, you're gonna respect the law, you're gonna respect the government. I remember my grandmother telling me that you will never wave a Mexican flag, you will wave an American flag, because that is, you're gonna be respectful of this country and we're Americans.
I've heard of people that are like, we're not speaking Spanish. I'm like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Like,
Yeah.
let your kids
I'm
speak
not
Spanish.
offended by the Mexican flag.
Yeah, yeah, you know, that's just something that was taught, and
Sure,
many
Six
people would see
Flags.
that. Yeah,
That's amazing, that the majority of it's because of education.
yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah, education, jobs in the economy. and
So how do you
healthcare.
feel about the Aslan branch of the Chicano movement?
What do you mean?
That's fine.
Like Mecha,
You know, I would consider myself, again, I know folks that are very radical, and I know folks that are very conservative in both ends of this political spectrum inside the Latino community. As I mentioned, you know, I have family who are very strong, you know, Trump supporters, strong conservatives, vote Republican. They're probably Republican super delegates, right? Things of that nature. And I know other folks who are so radical, they're talking about burning the White House down. They're not even talking about voting, right? You're talking about the right to vote. They're not even sold on voting. Voting isn't something they ever want to participate in
oh
because,
no, they need to run for office. I'm
Yeah.
not just asking them to vote.
yeah, no, absolutely. But these people don't even want to vote because that is a symbol of colonization, of government corruption.
In preference to what though? Do they have an alternative like that we could discuss?
You know, probably the other alternative for them would be a bloody revolution similar to the
But then
Pancho Villas.
what would we have after the bloody revolution?
You're right. They would put something. You would put
If
something
it's
there.
worth it, I'm down.
Yeah.
So
They would put. So those folks, I
what's the
think,
end game?
they have some sort of plot or plan that they would want to implement. I don't think it's feasible. I don't even know exactly what it is. If they did implement some sort of hierarchy, some sort of governance system, it would have many of the same faults that the current administration, the current governments have.
It
Again,
would be
no-
theirs, damn it.
yeah, you know, it would take us some time for that to sink in and happen. But, you know, again, even if you look at the indigenous sort of tribes that were in the United States, you know, they had slavery as well. They captured other people. They, you know, they captured other people's lands. They you know, enslaved individuals. They took their crops and things of that nature.
That was another tool used by the, you know, America, the larger population at that point, to put fear into.
Exactly, it's a
other-
power thing.
Yeah, it's a power thing, because
Wars.
there's a small, you know, a small tribe, a small segment of the larger indigenous people might have had those, you know, tendencies in place, and that then got expanded to, oh no, if they've got darker skin, clearly they're out to get you.
Yeah. So immigration is currently in there as well. We know that discussion has been. Also criminal justice reform. I know you talked about the position you may be running for. And I'm sure you've heard of the Texas Organizing Project, Top Texas Organizing Project. They are an organization that consider themselves to be running and influencing progressive items. They just launched a criminal justice reform sort of platform, and they're doing all sorts of stuff right now with bail reform. That might be an organization that you would want to look into. Yeah, Texas Organizing Project, yeah.
I don't have an internet connection.
No problem.
Where's the data?
Data.
I'll just take a picture of it and I'll send it to you.
Oh, okay.
That image right there?
No.
Which one are we talking about? This one?
No, talk about tops,
Yeah.
I don't know if you have that.
I have their information. I'll email it to you.
Okay.
You can look them up as well. Texas Organizing Project. These are some big organizations inside the Latino community that are advocating for certain rights, certain issues, certain platforms. You might have heard of them. MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense Education Fund. They do a lot of sort of civil rights sort of stuff. They do. They've had some pretty landmark cases. A lot of attorneys, they go and they fight, you know, declare lawsuits against civil rights violations and things of that nature. Latino Justice Pro-Def is the counterpart, so to speak. It's the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Education Fund. They're based out of New York. They do a lot of stuff with criminal justice reform as well. They consider themselves to be a civil rights advocacy organization. You've probably heard of LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. It's not Latino, it is Latin American, which that's another, yeah. The League of United Latin American Citizens, that's an organization to look into. NCLR has just been renamed Unidos US. They changed their name to kind of identify further with younger people. The NCLR stood for National Council of La Raza, which there was a snafu over the term La Raza because they felt that term set people off. They felt like that was more of a radical term. And that didn't identify with the majority of Latinos. I disagree. That's their business, though. That's what they decided to change it to. You have the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. You have their counterparts, the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. One little letter there changes them. One is more liberal, the other is more conservative. Voto Latino is another organization that looks to increase voter participation amongst millennials. You have the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, which is very big and very powerful, which basically runs over business.
I guess I mentioned are they more involved with trade with the Central Americas and perhaps not as much with because you mentioned, you kind of alluded to, perhaps not necessarily a full affiliation, but at least you alluded to kind of a pull for tourism and things like that for Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
Are they across most different Latin American and Hispanic cultures, or is it mostly just Central America and Mexican commerce?
I would say it's pretty much Mexican, some of Latin America as well. Puerto Rico is big.
So they are also thinking about like Puerto Rico. And
Yes,
okay.
yes, and there are Hispanic chambers of commerce all over the country.
Yes.
The San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce was one of the first and biggest, and they all kind of report and go up that chain to the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And as I mentioned, none of these organizations are without controversy. I'll share with you a couple of clips and
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
But most of these organizations have been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
LULAC's old.
Now, how do we get them, how do we welcome them into the Libertarian Party?
We need to, and that's part of the reason I'm here.
How can
we
we
need
make
to.
that happen?
We need to because, listen, I think part of the discussion, and there's
Can
a
you
lot
call
of
these folks right now? I mean, and let's start talking what needs to be done, because I know what needs to be done.
I have shown up at a LULAC meeting as a candidate. I started talking about legal weed, and one person booed me down.
Yeah.
I want you to run.
So Heather Fazio, who's here,
I know.
her and I have met frequently, and she's a very big advocate for the legalization of marijuana, the decriminalization of it. This is not, again, this is a windy road to get to it's going to take a long time to get there. We need to continue to touch base and communicate with these populations and talk about these things.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is I didn't realize that LULAC was not exactly pro-weed, and maybe I should have talked to some other Hispanic group that was more pro-weed.
But they should be, though. They should be.
They should be. I mean, I'm not.
They got to get with the program. So LULAC, I'm going to talk about LULAC here in just a moment
Okay.
because there's a couple of things that we're seeing that there's some changing of the guard happening. There's some shifts that have been happening, and we need to talk about them. And again, it's coming from young people. We're seeing a shift that's led by young people who are more radical, who say, we got to do this right now. There's an organization called United We Dream. This organization they have a strong base here in Houston, they have a strong base in Washington, D.C., and the entire purpose of their organization is to advocate for dreamers and this DACA thing, and these young people that were brought here. This is an example here in Texas. They got this on video here. This young person goes up to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, this video was taken 8 months ago, and basically said, look, why don't you want me here?
Oh,
Did you see this?
She's 8, 9 years old.
Again, Paxton's calling for deportation of these individuals, 800,000, which is the total population of immigrant youth inside of this country that are under DACA. this individual right here is going to ask her question. So look at this again. The nature of these individuals, if you're a DACA individual, if you're an immigrant, if you are a Latin American, if you're a Latino, if you are a small, tiny woman like she is, it's to be very humble. Look at her demeanor. It is a humble. Now, she's very bold to go up to this guy and ask him this question, but she does it anyway. She says, hey, my name is so-and-so, I'm a DACA recipient, why are you trying to deport me? He says, well, we're trying to follow the laws of the United States of America, boom, 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 so on and so forth. I guess you get the feeling where this is going.
Federal tyranny.
Yeah. Why are you trying to criminalize over hundreds of thousands of people that have come here, something like that? She says Paxton says Obama can't just make up a law. That's what he did, right, with this DACA thing.
For me, has something else for me. I provide for myself and my family. You know, human is we fought for that, and we won it, and we will protect one another.
Okay, so again, with regards to immigration, again, this is controversial, right? You have it on both sides. On one side, you say, well, hey, these people should be following the law, and you can't just come here illegally, and you need to, respect the United States law, things of that nature. You have other people who feel like, well, these people are fleeing tyranny, they're fleeing corruption, they're fleeing drug gangs and cartels, that perhaps those, gangs have been created based on United States laws, things of that nature, right? So you have it on both sides. In the Latino community, you have it as well. People who agree or disagree with individuals like this who, quote unquote, are here illegally, right? Quote unquote, illegally. That's the key thing here. So the next organization I want to highlight really quickly is LULAC. We talked about LULAC. Again, LULAC is not as progressive as it should be with regards to some of these items.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I honestly didn't know that. I was kind of thrown for a loop when I ended up at their meeting, and then I was booed for saying legal weed.
But it is getting there. Let me tell you
Okay.
why. Because I attended the LULAC National Convention, which was in San Antonio, Texas last year. Over the summer, I actually spoke there. Touched base with several young people, as well as individuals such as the president here, as well as their board chair. Their board chair was named Brent Wilkes. This individual, Roger Rocha, is the current president of LULAC. Recently, as of February, just a couple of months ago, he came out with a supportive statement to Donald Trump. He said something like, we want to support Donald Trump, and we commend his stance on immigration, and we agree with his border wall, something along those lines. And he sent like a signed memo to Donald Trump. Once this got out to the general public, people were pissed.
I didn't know that. I'm glad you brought that up.
People were pissed, and they basically, told him he needed to resign. He says, I'm not going to resign. My tenure is up for another year. I'm going to stay out my term as president, and I'm sorry that I made this statement. He's not going to quit, though, is what he says. Immediately, Brent Wilkes, right here, who heard of this, who I know is a good guy, happens to be white, he resigned immediately once he found out about this memo that Roger Rocha signed. Brent Wilkes, former CEO, he's a good guy, right
And
here.
is Rocha the CEO? They say he's president, because I understand that at LULAC they have councils that are president councils, and then they have
Correct.
CEOs.
This is the national. He's the national
president. Okay.
He's the national president.
Okay.
So Brent Wilkes resigned immediately, and Rocha said he's going to stay on. However, Abby Zapote, right here, she is the young person's president. She is like this is her right here.
Alternative.
She's the national vice president for young adults.
Okay.
She is saying, look, this guy should resign. So you have this this contention within the community, within the organization, where it says, look, he's got to go. We can't believe he said this sort of stuff. And, you know, I can highly see that she will be the national president at sometime relatively soon. She'll probably run, she could probably win, and that will lead this on a more progressive track. So that's where we're at with LULAC, with one organization. I also mentioned the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Their leader was Javier Palomares. Javier Palomares and the National Hispanic Chamber of Commerce were controversial in 2016 because it was the first time ever in their like 100-year history that this Chamber of Commerce endorsed someone for president. They endorsed Hillary Clinton for president because it was strictly anti-Trump. It was an anti-Trump move. They endorsed Hillary Clinton for president, and that was a big sort of thing. When Donald Trump was elected, Javier Palomares jumped on one of the business boards or councils of Donald Trump. So he sided with Donald Trump after he had publicly bashed him, and that pissed off a lot of people inside the Latino community.
Switch sides.
He switched sides. He stayed on with, and many people, you know, kind of gave Donald Trump a chance inside the Latino community, inside the African American community, and they, you know, perhaps were advisors to him, or they sat on some of his boards, or they tried to help him out in some fashion. And then slowly but surely, they resigned. They stepped off the boards because Donald Trump said this, Donald Trump tweeted this, or Donald Trump went and did this outrageous thing, so they stepped off. Javier Palomares stayed by the side for a long time. It was only after Donald Trump said something, I don't know exactly what he said, that Javier stepped off this, one of these boards that he was on of Donald Trump. Okay, after this, and again, this is,
Oh, it's when he ended DACA, it's the, or.
yes, perhaps when he ended DACA, that's
Yeah,
exactly when
he
he
resigned.
resigned from the board. This really, quite frankly, from some of my contacts, all of this sort of stuff, him standing by Trump, and Palomares is from Texas, put a target on Palomares' back, and it came to the public knowledge that he had some sort of inappropriate sexual and financial relationships inside of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and he resigned. He resigned as of 2 months ago. Very embattled. He fought tooth and nail to go down, but he did. In fact, in here he talks about, I think he makes a statement that he had some sort of affair with one of his board members.
There should be a manual.
Yeah.
And in the manual, it should say, when you get involved in politics, there's a statistical probability that you're going to be accused of every bad thing there is to be accused of. Just to expect that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't even, I didn't think you needed a manual at this point. I thought
Yeah.
it was pretty common knowledge.
Scandal.
So it does look like he had some sort of affair. It was consensual, but nonetheless, that brings scandal at this level. And again, this talks about his resignation comes along with this whole thing with the LULAC sort of thing as well. So these are two very high-profile organizations that have been accused of being inappropriate in some fashion or being, you know, faux pas.
Sure, and you know, obviously with the president that we currently have, that's kind of like in vogue, because we have sort of the president and king of impropriety.
Yeah. So you can also look at Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, again, had her run for the last presidency in 2016, and she made a big push to get people of color and to win over the people of color vote, particularly Latinos and African Americans. So much to the point where it was considered pandering. They had this thing for her called La Hillary. That's something that probably one of her campaign people put together, and it was a complete joke.
Yeah.
What a farce. I mean, nobody, I don't know anybody that took this thing seriously. La Hillary. In fact, there was a social media movement because they tried to make her seem like, oh, well, Hillary Clinton's like your grandmother. She's like your abuela. And there was a pushback saying, hashtag not my abuela, because many folks just didn't like Hillary Clinton, right? Just didn't like Hillary Clinton.
No.
In fact, there was a popular joke that kind of came up when they said, well, Hillary Clinton is going to wear this outfit at the Univision debate, where she's going to be on Univision, one of the debates leading up to the 2016 election. her
That's
pander.
gotta be Photoshop.
It's Photoshop, but it is a
Yeah.
joke
Yeah.
to say that, she was a pander and she would wear this to do anything for these votes. In fact, furthermore, she, let me see, she went on, what was it here? She went on, gosh, what am I trying to do? Oh yeah, she went on a show called The Breakfast Club. You might have heard of it.
No, I haven't seen this one. I'm sure it's.
So she went on this Breakfast Club, which is, a hip radio station that has a national following. They're based out of New York. And this was right around the time that Beyonce had made a song and said something about she keeps hot sauce in her bag, just because that's kind of a cool, in vogue thing to do. So this is Hillary Clinton here, and her, they ask her a question here.
What's something that you always carry with you? Hot sauce.
Really? You,
Yeah.
really? You getting information right now? Hot sauce from
I'd
my
say
bag.
Yeah.
Hot sauce.
Really?
Yes.
Now listen, I
Yes.
want you to know, people are gonna see this and say, okay, she's pandering to black people.
Okay. Is it working?
Yeah.
No, seriously, hot sauce. I've been eating a lot of hot sauce.
Let's see the hot sauce.
Yeah.
Peppers and hot
So again, when this happened, it was like, okay, this is the stupidest thing
It's like
ever.
she cringed.
Exactly.
Why?
Exactly. Now you can see
Well,
actually the reaction.
Her husband.
Okay. No, seriously.
Again, you can see the reaction here.
Okay, she's pandering to black people.
Well, then you know you have to.
Well, we appreciate you doing that.
So watch the girl's reaction on the far right when she
What's
asked
something
her.
that you always carry with you? Hot sauce.
Really? You,
Yeah.
It's like,
you getting information right now? Hot sauce from my
and then
bag.
the other sorry part about
Hot
this is that
sauce. Really?
he says, well, people are going to see this and they're going to say you're pandering to black people. And she says, well, is it working? It's like, lady, come on.
And I think it's like she's trying to be meta, but
She's trying too hard, and it was a complete joke. It was a complete joke. And, quite honestly, inside the Latino community, there was some hope for Hillary Clinton. People did want to get behind Hillary Clinton, and one of those particular hopes was that she might pick Julian Castro to be her vice president. Julian Castro was the mayor of San Antonio. He served as the Secretary for Housing and Urban Development in the Obama administration. And when Hillary Clinton picked Kane out of, I think, Virginia or West Virginia, many people were disappointed and felt like she would not win the true Latino vote
But
because
Kane
Julian Castro.
supposedly, I don't remember how good his
Kane
Spanish
spoke a
was.
little bit of Spanish, which,
I don't know if he's as good as mine though.
yeah.
But
No,
yes,
that's
he
a
did.
good point. That's a good point about the Spanish. People did recognize that. However, that would not be the sole solidifier to winning over this population of people. But these organizations are behind. They need to be talking about the legalization of marijuana. They need to be talking about criminal justice reform. Now, let me give you another example. So I have many family members, young men, maybe in their 40s at this point, maybe in their 50s, who are just coming home from prison. And they're coming home from prison for things like marijuana, things like drugs, right? Their parents and grandparents are really ashamed of them. Because again, man, my son broke the law, he went to prison. I don't want to tell people that he's been to prison. It's kind of a sensitive and sore subject, right? But again, very humble, very quiet, very respectful population of these individuals. So why would they want to advocate for legalization of marijuana? Their thing is that they should be advocating for people to follow the law. It's easier to follow the law than to advocate to change the law. Now, that's not everyone. That's not everyone. Again, you have these population of young people who are really trying to buck the trend right now, right? These United We Dream folks, these people like Abby Zapota who will take over at LULAC. The other thing, you talked about someone who could rally this population of people. Julian Castro. I don't totally agree with everything that this guy does, but here's the thing. He's a decent looking guy. He's been into a leadership position before, a mayor of a really, really large city. in the secretary or in the cabinet of the federal government, again, in the president's cabinet. He's somewhat well-spoken. Politically, he's somewhat of a moderate. He can get folks from the far left and folks from the far right to perhaps buy into him and follow him. He would be a safe bet. Many people looked to him and they said, you know what, if we're going to get a Latino president, it will probably be him. It will probably be him. If you get someone who's too far to the left or too far to the right, they're probably not going to win it out. They could. You take, for instance, on the Republican side, the final three candidates to win the Republican nomination were Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio. Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, now some people would say, well, is Ted Cruz really Latino?
Right.
Right?
He's like the most anglicized.
Exactly.
But,
He's
yeah.
born in Canada, he comes from Cuban background. Nonetheless,
one of Rubio's family members was convicted for a drug case.
perhaps, yeah.
I don't know which one it was. I think it was his uncle or something like that.
So had Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz won, they would have been the first Latino candidate to win over one of the major parties' nominations. So in a lot of ways, you talk about the representation, you talk about the legitimacy, that would have been a groundbreaking thing. We're still fighting for a lot of these firsts and a lot of things, and that would have been one of them. So Richard Spencer, this is an incident that happened about a month ago. Richard Spencer is a known white supremacist. I don't know if y'all know who he is. He's at Michigan State University.
No,
I've heard of this guy.
Okay.
How many followers does this guy really
He
have?
probably has quite a bit. So
in
this,
Michigan.
well, this, he travels. He travels. He spoke at Michigan State University, and it was well published. Many individuals said, look, they went to the Michigan State administration and said, we don't want this guy here on our campus.
Isn't that generally the case though? Nobody likes him.
Yeah, he showed up anyway. The university said, we can't do anything about it, it's free speech, yada yada. He ended up showing up to protests, and they had counter protesters present who were scuffling with the protesters, and it erupted in some violence. Okay, there's a couple of videos here. See if I can get this pulled up here. This is a 2-hour video.
Oh, that's
How many people were at this protest?
probably.
The police did a good job of wrangling people up.
Trying to get around here for you.
There's maybe 100 to 200 people there.
Looks like a lot of cops.
Probably more cops than people.
Yeah, well, where's the people? And
The cops are all there, the people aren't.
we got 20 people there, 20 people there.
Okay, so there's your white supremacists right here.
That looks like about 6 guys and some cops. Like I said, man, when I see 1,000 guys goose-stepping through downtown, then we'll have a problem.
I couldn't even. If I saw that, I would get arrested.
The police are out there in full
Yeah,
gear.
there's a bunch of, that's most of what we see here, and a couple of people.
Yesterday was one where they had here outside the hotel. Was it Friday or was it Saturday when they had a little walk with open carrying?
It must have been Saturdays. I wasn't.
So what you find in a lot of these sort of protests is the police will show up and they'll tell people, okay, you're here to protest, you're here to demonstrate, you're here to exercise your First Amendment right. You have to go on the side over here though. Stand up, we've got this little space for you to stand over here on the side, and that's where you can so you don't disrupt anything. That's what they'll tell these folks. So this person's being struck and being sprayed. Here's what we're seeing again though. Here's the key thing, it's the young people that are going out here fighting. Now you may say, well, this isn't a real protest or isn't a real rally. Well, look, these folks out here doing
What do they
something.
want?
See, you think they think. What do you mean?
What is their goal? Why are they, their grievance, their justification for doing this is?
So, okay, we can look at the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement really sparked up over a couple of big incidents of young black men who were shot and killed by the police. One of them happened in Ferguson, Missouri. Okay, Ferguson, Missouri, they had an incident where a young black man was shot. His name was Michael Brown, shot by a police officer. The police officer got off.
Yeah. We're all
So they went and rioted. They rioted and they tore up all these businesses, black businesses. And people were saying, look at these people.
They tore up fluorescent streets.
They're tearing up their own businesses, their own communities, right? They're doing all this stuff. So what they wanted was justice. They wanted this cop to be found guilty of something. Give him a charge, fire him from his job, put him in prison, do something. That didn't happen. So they said, you know what, we're pissed. We got this rage. We're gonna go riot now. That's the only way they could get their expression out, so to speak. Now, none of those individuals were going to go and take over the city hall. They weren't going to take over a local government. They weren't going to say any revolution of any sorts in Missouri, in Ferguson, or nationally. But that's, again, when you talk about having a more organized sort of plan of attack, so to speak, what it may be. Exactly. And you have all of this rage right now. And people are trying to organize in the best way they can with the United We Dream organizations, with the LULACs, with the NCLRs. And it's still coming together. It's still a work. You also mentioned, how can we get some of these folks in the Libertarian Party? How can we continue to talk about freedom and liberty for these individuals? And we need to continue to get into those spaces and communicate these things. Yes. So listen, let me cap this off, just say, look, thank you all for being here and being a part of this discussion. I know we talked about a lot of different things, but we can keep this discussion going. Right? We don't want to just end right here. I'll give you my contact information. We can stay in touch and let's see what we can do.
Sounds good.
Thank you for sticking with us the whole time as well.
No problem. And
Thank you.
I have on my